I have been a public school teacher, principal, and central office administrator. After 40 years in education as a career, I have retired and have with me two very special people who want to share with you some concerns we have about Common Core. Carl, would you introduce yourself and we'll get started.
I'm Carl Priest, and Carol neglected to say she's Dr. Carol Thorne. So, Doctor, thank you for being here. I'm Carl Priest. I'm a retired teacher. I was in professional education for over 34 years. 3 of those years was an elementary school principal. Most of the time I was a math specialist, but I worked with children from kindergarten all the way through 9th grade.
Great. Would you like to share any other experiences you've had in education?
Well, the things that I want to bring out for this video is that I observed the academics being dumbed down. The longer that I was there, the worse it became. And just to be brief, it was actually dangerous for children to be in the government schools physically and most certainly spiritually.
I noticed very much when they took prayer out of schools and when they took discipline by means of the paddle out of schools that the downslide began. Bullying increased phenomenally, and there was nothing we could do as teachers or administrators to stifle this bad behavior. What were your observations on the conditions of public schools today?
I just covered that with those comments, so I'd be repeating myself on that.
All right. Was there anything that impacted you about Christian students in public schools?
Absolutely. The year after I retired, a former student invited me to the high school to speak to the Fellowship of Christian Athletes at lunch. And I went in there a little bit before lunch and sat down in the hall. The lunch bell rang. The students poured out of the classroom. And within 10 feet of me, a male and female couple started making out passionately, just as if I wasn't there, but they obviously knew I was. And a few seconds later, a boy came down the hall wearing a dress. He recognized me, having been a former student of my middle school, and he came up to speak to me. And later I asked that Fellowship of Christian Athlete student leader if it was a joke, if he was a clown, because I thought it was pretty bad if he was, but it turned out he was one of 2 bisexual males that wore dresses around that high school. Then the handful of students and I and their faculty sponsor went into the auditorium to have our Bible study. We shut the door. You could still hear the roar of the students. And at that point it hit me. These children, these young people were not salt and light. They were Christians in the catacombs. And they really had no business being there.
What is your opinion of homeschooling?
I used to take math field day teams and chess club teams to competition. And long before I became an advocate of homeschooling, I noticed the homeschoolers were very academically sharp and competitive in math and chess. So I was impressed that way. But since then, I've realized that biblically, education should be in the hands of parents and as a last resort in a biblically sound Christian school.
All right. Our other guest today is Betty Jarvis. Betty, would you share some of your experiences in education?
I would be happy to, Carol. I'm very concerned. I started teaching in 1958, and in the 50s, the United States was #1 in education. And in the 60s, the federal government passed an act, ESEA, and they wanted to help the local schools with reading and math. Well, as a teacher with a history background, I knew that they were not allowed to do this, that it was unconstitutional. But everybody bought in because they gave money. I was a reading specialist, and the federal government actually paid my salary. I didn't get it from the state, it came from the federal. I became very concerned. I watched education deteriorate to the point that I actually ran for the Board of Education and won a position in the 90s. But let me go back to my health field. In the early 90s, I looked at the health curriculum and I saw that it called for me or a health teacher to put a condom on a banana. And I thought, I will not do that. Seventh graders, those children belong to those parents, and that is not the job for me. Fortunately, I had a couple of other fields, so I transferred out of health, but I had friends who had to stay with the health. That's the only field they had. I went to my social studies and reading fields. Well, after that, then the federal government implemented inclusion. We had to take special education children into the regular classroom. And I think one of the saddest days of my life, I was teaching a social studies class, and a little special ed boy in a wheelchair was wheeled into my third period social studies class, seventh graders. He had bladder, kidney problems, and he had some mental deficiency too. Well, he promptly urinated all over the floor, and his aide, very gracious lady, came in and took him out. He was so embarrassed, so embarrassed. It was so pitiful. The custodian came and mopped up the urine. My seventh graders laughed at the child, and that's what seventh graders will do. I talked to them about it, and I told them how sad it was and how he felt. They said, well, why doesn't he stay in the special ed room? The special ed teacher's a really nice man. And why doesn't he stay in the special ed room? And I said, because he has an IEP that says he has to be in here. But why do they do that? And kids always would ask me, and I always tried to tell them truthfully. And I told them that the government said it had to be. They didn't understand why the government didn't understand that that wasn't the thing to do. I could not get them back on target for a long time. Well, it was very upsetting to me, but that little boy continued to come, and at least once a week it disrupted the regular classroom because we had to send for the aide, we had to mop up the urine, and we had to get on task, but at least the children understood and didn't laugh at the little boy. That was the only thing I could give to him. It was very sad. It still saddens me. Later on, he was up at Capitol High, and you probably know that he died. And he had a hard time. You remember it, Carol?
Yeah, and it seems like the more the federal government gets involved in education, test scores dive and conditions become more and more difficult for teachers and administrators.
And not only that, first of all, the federal government, under our Constitution, under the 10th Amendment to the Constitution, they do not have any part of education. It's state and local government. And our people in Washington took an oath to uphold the Constitution. Well, if you're going to uphold the Constitution, aren't you going to obey the 10th Amendment? So this really bothers me. Well, I have found out with this Common Core curriculum, we went through inclusion, then we went No Child Left Behind. You and I both know children will be left behind. There are children who are extremely bright in math. Some people can't keep up. But there's a place for them too. Some people are very good in English and reading. Every child has a gift. But you will be left behind. Well, they pushed that down the states and gave them money to implement. That money from the federal government has no money. what they get comes from us, we the people. So, there's something wrong here. Well, the more I observed, like I said, I ran for the board and I won. And I fought to bring fundamentals back into the schools. Our children were not getting reading and writing skills. And I remember thinking to myself, there are no teachers on the board. They really need to know what's happening. They knew what was happening. I didn't. And it was very difficult for me because I had been in the classroom since 1958 and I did know what was happening. But as you know, there are different ways to control your citizens. You can control them through intimidation. You can control them through manipulation. But the thing that's happening in our schools, they're being controlled through indoctrination. It saddens me that when I see the books, classroom teachers still show me the books and what they have to say and what they have to do. And it breaks my heart to see my children. I have grandchildren, and I want them to have the best. And when you indoctrinate children till they don't think for themselves, you might as well do a lobotomy. I mean, they become serfs. They do not think for themselves, and every moral principle that you believe in will be lost to them. And I'm having to say this, but I honestly think that you better get your children out of government schools. They are no longer public schools. They are government schools.
Well, Betty, who wrote the Common Core curriculum?
The Common Core curriculum was written by Washington bureaucrats. The Bill Gates Foundation is one that gave millions of dollars to come up with this Common Core curriculum, and it's getting our little people. But let me say this, Carol. Melinda and Bill Gates, I can remember reading the newspaper in the 90s. When they were married, they rented all of the hotels around. They wanted their privacy. They want privacy for their children. But you know something? Have you ever seen the data file that yours and my children have? Here you go, Carol. See what you think of those. That's what's contained in your child's data file.
As a result of Common Core?
Well, it has built over the years, but this is what is going to be. Tell me what parental custody issues should be in your child's file. Will it be in Melinda and Bill Gates' file?
Well, this biometric data, the thumbprint, and the retina recognition, discipline records, hobbies, attitudes on school, whether or not they complete their homework, their social security number. There's a real invasion of privacy here when it comes to student records, and importantly, who has access to those records.
They can give them, that law was changed without Congress's permit, and those records can go out to people who have no business having them. And right here, your ESEA Act, where they gave us money to help with reading and math back in the 60s. It forbids a national curriculum. It forbids it. But
That's what Common Core is.
Common Core is a national curriculum.
Well, can the local and state departments of education change or alter the Common Core standards?
No. If it's not successful, there's nothing you can do about it because we don't own them. The national federal government owns them. I have all the information. I have studied this and studied it, and I have to tell you, my heart breaks over it. But I have been working with a group called Operation Jericho, And Operation Jericho is trying to do something about education, trying to get it back on the local and state level. And Carl Priest is going to tell you how to find this information.
Thank you, Betty. You've enlightened me on some things. And as you were speaking, I was wondering, I'm pretty sure the Gates children go to private schools. So I just wonder if they're subjected to the same invasion of privacy you were talking about. We hopefully will be able to get the URL on the screen when you view this video. If not, it'll be in the video description. A link to the indoctrination movie, which showed why government schools are bad for any child, especially Christian children, but also have the link to the Operation Jericho, where we provide resources to help, first of all, pastors, and second of all, parents with advice and links to other people in their area who will help them rescue the children. Thank you, Dr. Thom, for interviewing us, and thank you, Betty, for being here.